Before we get started with today's episode with Carolyn, I wanted to mention that her and I had a great conversation and I just loved doing this podcast with her. And then after we had wrapped up, I realized that I had so many more questions for her. So we had decided to get back on and just answer a couple of those questions. But that recording ended up being a little bit longer than I had anticipated. So that is going to be a part 2. So after you listen to this episode, stay tuned for the next week when I will publish part 2 of my interview with Carolyn, where she gives us some really great tangible things that we can do, where we can really process our emotions on a deeper level and work through the shadow self. Welcome to Empowered Mind, Body, Soul. I'm your host, Olivia Paige with Ascension Healing Sounds. And in today's episode, we're joined by Carolyn Cole, who is a licensed clinical professional counselor. And today we are going to be talking about how she incorporates spirituality into psychotherapy. Empowered Mind, Body, Soul. A podcast journey to your truth with heartfelt stories, sound healing, and life hacks. Hi, Carolyn. Thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you as well. So let's just jump right in and talk about really what led you to start incorporating spirituality into your psychotherapy practice.
Yeah, no, I'd love to talk about that. It really started with my own personal journey where I would say I went through a spiritual awakening process back around probably 2017, 2018. And I think as I just started to experience myself differently and life differently, and I found so much value in that, it almost felt natural to start incorporating that in some of the clinical work that I was doing with some of my clients. And so it just feels really enjoyable for me. And I find a lot of clients end up feeling really safe in terms of wanting to be able to share just some different spiritual mindsets and experiences that they have too. And just knowing that they're with a therapist who can be really open to that as well.
And so you said you had this awakening. Can you tell us a little more about that awakening? What were you learning? What did you discover?
Yeah, it really was a whole thing. And I think a lot of times, I know it doesn't always happen like this, but a lot of times there does tend to be some precipitating events that causes this to happen. And so I had actually encountered a breakup of a relationship that impacted me in a way like I had never experienced before. And I almost felt like I just started having just interesting things happen in my life. And it almost felt like what I was going through is what we would call an ego death. And I found myself just starting to feel drawn to just different spiritual teachers and spirituality and just connecting more with, I think, the spiritual path in general, which was something I had not really encountered up until this point. And so I would say those are the pieces that led me to start on this spiritual awakening or spiritual journey path. I almost feel like once you start that path, you can't go back. And you don't want to go back to the way life was before because it can just feel, so freeing, just so present. I don't know, I just find I myself just have this trust in the process and that I'm being guided perfectly. And it helps to be able to release control and it just feels so freeing.
Awesome. What have been some of your biggest takeaways in working in like the spiritual community?
I think I really just enjoy, working with those who want to go deeper into understanding themselves and to be able to work on the healing process. As I had worked with a spiritual coach for a period of time too, where I was introduced to shadow work. And there is a model of psychotherapy that kind of like incorporates that. It's called internal family systems, where you work with different parts that are within the subconscious self that tend to show up. And I just found for myself through doing different shadow work exercises, although it felt certainly intense during the process, since you're connecting so deeply with these emotions that you're holding onto within you, it just felt so relieving then to be on the other side and to be able to go through a lot of the healing. And so I found just really the significant shift within myself. And then as I started using some of this approach with some different clients who were really open to it, that's where I saw so much transformation that was happening too. And I think that is one of the biggest takeaways that I would have from being on the spiritual journey, that it really is this inner journey, this inner process. And how, yeah, looking at it from that perspective and being willing to go within, that can really help to transform oneself and your life.
I think that shadow work is important, absolutely. What kind of education did you get to become a licensed professional counselor?
I started off, I guess, with a bachelor's degree in something called rehabilitation services. And so I ended up changing my major a couple of times. And I initially was going to be a music teacher, then decided I didn't really want to go that route. And then I ended up just moving over into this major called rehabilitation services. And I took a course that was psychiatric rehabilitation. And that just like really fascinated me so much. And then I ended up doing this internship where I was able to work with those who had a serious and persistent mental illness and were just on the journey of their own recovery process. And I just was fascinated with how the brain worked. And I just loved the work that I did within the internship. And then I ended up being hired by the company and worked there for about 10 years. And through that process and just having this opportunity, yeah, to really be able to provide just some different counseling skills. And I ran some different groups. And interestingly enough, I did run a spirituality group at that job. And this is before I realized I was going to be embarking on this spiritual journey, before it came to my conscious awareness. But I found I was really interested in what happens within somebody, what makes somebody tick, almost like going deeper down. And so at that point, I realized, okay, I think the next step would be for me to get my graduate degree to be able to become a therapist. And so I took some time to think about what path I wanted to take, what specific course of study I wanted to do, and ended up deciding to go with family counseling at that point. And so really enjoyed just some of the different courses that I took, looking at, I think, again, just like what happens within somebody, also looking at how relationships can impact somebody as well, and looking at ways to be able to heal some of these relationships. Then after I received my master's degree, the way it works in the therapy world is that you need 2 years of supervision before you're able to attain your terminal license to be able to practice more independently. And I found at first I really loved working with couples and with relationships. And I still do that in the work that I do. But as I've been on my own journey where I find, gosh, the relationship you have with yourself, that really is the key relationship. That's really where I find like I'm focusing my therapy work on now, how to help others heal this relationship with themselves, or really at least get more comfortable with it or look at it more deeply and see then how they're able to then, I guess, inadvertently be able to transform the relationships that they're into. And so I would say that is what my journey has been. And I've had experience working with kids, with adolescents, with young adults, older adults, families, and couples. And so it's been, yeah, just an interesting journey for sure, even in thinking how I myself have changed along the journey and how that's impacted my work changing too.
Okay. And how long were you working as a therapist before you incorporated the spirituality?
Yes, I guess I formally became a therapist in 2011. I'm trying to think, and I would say it was probably around maybe 2019, something like that, that I started bringing more spirituality in. So, in a way, it feels like not too long, but maybe it is a long time as well.
Okay, so you're based out of Chicago, Illinois, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and do you work virtually with clients or in person? And can you work with clients who are out of state?
That's a great question. And so there's so many options that have opened up with telehealth these days. And so right now I only practice through telehealth, but I'm only able to provide therapy services to those who live in Illinois right now because that's what my license is. And so, but they can be anywhere within the state. They don't have to be in Chicago. And who knows, maybe down the road that will change if I embark on becoming licensed in a couple different states. But presently, at the time that we're doing this recording, it's just in Illinois.
So, where could people find you if they are in Illinois and they want to work with you?
And so I have a website that's www.carolinacole.com. And I also have Instagram, and my Instagram handle is Carolyn_on_self_love. And you're able to find me
Okay.
and connect with me both those ways.
Okay. Those links will be in the show notes for sure.
Perfect.
So I know this was something that we had talked about in our initial meeting together. And let's talk about the power of believing in yourself.
That is so powerful. There's a quote, I can't think of who it's by off the top of my head, but it says, if you believe you can, you will. If you believe you can't, you won't. And I think it can be so important to think, what is the story that you're telling yourself about a situation? And this is something that I've worked on for myself too, because sometimes when the ego steps in, it's trying to create the sense of safety and holding you back in some sort of way. But it can be so important to check in with yourself. What are you telling yourself? Do you believe that if you put your mind to something, or your mind and your heart are aligned, that you're able to accomplish what you set out to do? And I find a lot of times it is just overcoming fears that step in. It's just this fear of the unknown, a fear of being seen, fear of being enough. And I think a lot of times it is through that inner work as a way to be able to overcome that. But once you're able to maybe not eliminate those things, but feel like you're getting a step ahead of them so that you are choosing to lead the way rather than these fears or insecurities leading the way, then that's when almost like magical things can start to happen.
So, do you work on that with your clients in your sessions?
I do work on that with my clients in our sessions. I feel like through how somebody is sharing something, I'm pretty good at being able to pick up on, okay, what is that deeper fear that does exist there? That sometimes as people are talking, they're not aware that they're even holding on to this deeper down. And so then that's when I'll just also bring in some of that parts work and that inner work for the clients that are open to that, to do some work on starting to almost like transform that emotion that's within them.
So let's go back to you had mentioned IFS, internal family systems. Was that part of your training at university, or is that a whole nother program? Because I've heard other people talk about it too.
Yeah, it was not training that I received at the university that I attended. Trying to even think
Okay.
when it was I became aware of it. Might have been just over the past couple years, but I found, gosh, this really resonates with me so much. And I almost felt, yes, this is, I think, the framework that feels like that I really believe in, that can really help people. And I'm not officially certified in IFS because there's a process with that. So I like to say I'm IFS informed, where I've taken different trainings on it and read different books and then help provide education and just incorporate some of the factors into the work that we do. But it's, yeah, it's such a powerful approach.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what the approach is?
Yeah. And so IFS really looks at like we have this self. And I think that's where we can look at it from the spiritual aspect. And it's often called like a spiritual therapy approach. And our self can be like our consciousness, our authentic self, our true self. And then we also have different wounds that exist within us too, that we all carry. And we have some unprocessed wounds, right? And then we have wounds that we might be aware of that are there. And so our psyche tends to not want us to experience these wounds because it can be a pretty painful process, as we know, right? Where it might bring up tears or anxiety or fears
Mhm.
or all sorts of strong emotions like that. And so we then have different parts that step in that are trying to protect us from experiencing the wound. And it can be really interesting, I think, just going within and understanding what parts are there, how are they trying to serve us. IFS has this approach that there's no bad parts. They all have good intentions, even if they don't feel so great to experience sometimes. And then as we just become like more comfortable with the parts, more familiar with them, and it's almost like seeing what could happen if they didn't have to work so hard to protect us. How would they feel if we said, hey, we do want to be able to access this wound to be able to do some healing? And the movie that's out, Inside Out 2, and I think Inside Out
Okay.
1 as well, that's really based on the IFS framework. And so that can be just like an interesting way to just learn more about it too.
Oh, okay. So in the movie, maybe even the first movie where Joy really wanted to be at the forefront and definitely didn't want sadness part of it because she felt like sadness was this lower energy or this lower emotion, and we need to make sure it's just joy all the time. And
Mhm.
by the end of the movie, you're realizing that it's okay to feel the sadness and it was important and it helped create, oh, I don't know if balance is the right word, but it just helped create a deeper connection, maybe with the self even,
Yes, absolutely.
to experience all of the emotions instead of just trying to have the good emotions.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
always like to say emotions want to be felt. And so it really is, yeah,
Right.
just acknowledging their presence, then also seeing them as a part of us. And so instead of saying, I am anxious, maybe it's okay, like I sense anxiety is here now. Let's take a look at what anxiety wants to communicate or what's happening.
Oh, okay. Okay. That
Yeah,
sounds like a really interesting modality.
yeah,
Yeah,
it
I'll
is.
have to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely.
What could you tell listeners about the importance of honoring their mental health? Because I think there's so much stigma around mental health and that we could be taught to just be strong and just work through it and push through it and not need help. What could you say to help someone feel more comfortable with addressing their mental health and taking care of their mental health?
Yeah, I think it's important to look at just emotions or natural things to be experiencing. We can think of emotions as energy and motion, right? And so it is really good to look at what is coming up. I know that there's a term in the spiritual community called spiritual bypassing. And when it comes to our mental health, we don't want to be bypassing these different feelings that are coming up to just try to stay in this elevated state at all times. And it's really important to, on your journey, to just get to know yourself and even honor your inner self more easily. To be able to go through that process and know it's okay to feel your feelings and it's okay to get help. I often also share, I think everybody can benefit from therapy when you're looking at maybe it's a way to just help you get unstuck. Maybe it's a way to help you unravel stuff that's going around in your head. Maybe it's just like a conversation that's helping you work towards achieving your goals, right? Where for some, maybe it is working through maybe an unprocessed trauma that you've been almost like subconsciously suppressing or putting to the side because it feels really big too. And I think that there's a lot of work that has been done in decreasing the stigma of mental health, but there's still more work to do too. But I think the more everybody's most able to talk about it, that can help decrease the stigma too. I know I hear a lot of my younger clients who are maybe like in their 20s, for example, how they'll be telling me about conversations they have with friends about, oh, yeah, I was talking to my therapist about this, or I went to go see my therapist. And so I feel like it is becoming more of just kinds of this thing that people are more open with talking about and that it is okay to be getting that help. It doesn't mean that you're weak, which I think can be some of the stigma that's been associated with it in the past. Instead, I like to say, gosh, you're really courageous and really strong for choosing to be able to get that help and support on your journey so that you can be experiencing the most fulfilling life that you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I also feel like it's a way to feel supported because I feel like sometimes we feel alone and we feel like we don't really have a support system or support from the community. So I think seeing a therapist can help with that too, just feeling, yeah, like you have some kind of support, some kind of anchor, someone that you can turn to, like you said, explore those parts of yourself that maybe you keep hidden or that you ignore or hide from the rest of the world, to help you get comfortable with your own self.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, is there something simple that someone could do, or I don't know if it would be a daily routine, but something that they could do to start working on believing in themselves?
I am a big fan of affirmations. And so I think it can be really great to start to think about. Let me back up a second. I would say to start really noticing and observing what is your self talk. And I like to refer to this as almost like programming that we have, right? It's these thoughts that we've thought over and over again that have become core beliefs for us. And then they become like the background noise in our minds. And a lot of times we're not really having this conscious awareness of them unless we are being intentional about that. And so I think in terms of believing in oneself, first, it's really important to just notice, what are those thoughts saying that you notice? And it's almost like you're taking a step outside of yourself and just observing those thoughts and getting familiar with some of those thoughts are. And you might even like to jot them down just to be able to have that awareness for yourself when certain thoughts pop in your mind. And then you can ask yourself, what is maybe a more empowering, affirmative thoughts that you would like to start telling yourself instead? And then you start practicing that and being intentional with that. And then the more that you're implementing that, the more those more empowering thoughts start to become the thoughts that are in the back of your mind. And so it just takes intention and practice. From the science standpoint, it's really, I'm trying to think what the word would be. You're like rewiring your neural pathways through that way. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so it's, yeah, really thinking, what do you want to start to tell yourself? And maybe it's even if you use a word that ends with ing, I feel like that's like you're in the process of becoming, or you're doing, or you're trying. If it doesn't feel like you're there yet, or these affirmations, like I feel like, I don't know if I really believe in that, but I think we can believe that, hey, we're doing, we're becoming, we're trying. And sometimes that's something that can feel easier too.
So, are you saying we can use those types of words of I'm trying to feel happier, whatever the empowering thought is, we can use that as part of the affirmation?
You can use that as part of the affirmation. Yeah. So if you tell yourself, like, I am happy,
Okay.
you might notice a weird feeling in your gut if there's like a conflict
Yeah.
between that statement and this
Yeah.
belief that you're working on changing. But if it's, yeah, I am working on becoming happier, or I'm trying to become happy, that might feel more realistic.
Yeah. I feel like when you try to say something and you get that feeling, what to me, what it feels like is a lie. I feel
Right.
like I'm lying to myself because it's not really what I'm feeling. And I've seen, like, in the spiritual community, where it's like you have to speak about it as if it's already happened. And sometimes that's really hard, or at least for me, it's hard. And because, like I said, I feel like I'm lying to myself. So I love that you said it's okay to say it in a way of, I'm trying to feel more happy. I am working on becoming more happy, or I'm trying to find more joy in my life, or whatever it is. So I really appreciate hearing that and feeling like I've been given permission
Yeah.
It's just feels like a sigh of relief. So thank you.
Oh, good. You're welcome. I'm so glad that resonated for you.
Yeah, it really did because otherwise in the spiritual community it just feels icky and like I'm being gaslit, like I have to speak of it right now as if it's already happened. So I like that much better. And so there is true science because you always hear that, but I've never known anyone who's really trained and has learned about the brain. So there really is true science that these affirmations will help create new pathways, neural pathways like in your brain.
Yeah, so what you're doing is you're creating new beliefs. And so our neural pathways are currently linked based on things that we do unconsciously, right? Where it might even be something like, I don't know, getting up to go to the bathroom in the morning. You probably do that without thinking, it's just an automatic thing. Or when you find you're like driving someplace and you're almost like tuning out because you know how to do it, and different habits that we have. And that same thing happens just with our memories or our thoughts. I think there's a lot of times, a lot of people tend to just think the same sorts of thoughts over and over. And maybe some of you who are listening might notice that if there's problems that you end up talking about or thinking about over and over, then it can feel like you get stuck in that. But yeah, there's science with neuroplasticity is the formal name of it, of what we can do to be able to do this rewiring in our brain and rewiring neural pathways and creating new neural pathways through just having intention and repetition behind something. And so it really is thinking, what is that new thought that you want to be thinking? And I can just tell you from a personal experience, I think in the past I would be anxious a lot and really focused on lack a lot. And I've noticed with a lot of just the work I've done on myself, where I've really embodied just more self compassion, right? And more being able to be present in the moment and just thinking, how can I just focus right now and not worry so much about what's to come? I've noticed just as I've been really intentional about that, my self talk has changed too. And so I share that just as a personal example that it certainly can be done. And so it's really interesting. And I think Dr. Joe Dispenza also talks a lot about this too, with a lot of the research that he has done as well. And so he's not in the therapy
Oh,
world,
okay.
but he studies, neuroscience and consciousness. So
Okay. And is there a rule of thumb on like how long it takes, or is it different for everyone? How long it takes to rewire the brain?
I think it's probably different for everyone. And it might take something. I feel like I've heard at least 30 days before. And so I think with that, it's just thinking, what are the thoughts that you want to be thinking? And with that, it's also not bypassing those negative thoughts or those negative emotions. I think it's just asking yourself, okay, is this like negative thought? Is this true? Is this somebody else's story that I've absorbed about myself that I keep thinking over and over? And then just empowering yourself to be thinking, no, this is what I want to be thinking instead. And it might be you notice that old thought pops back in and recognizing that through just being aware of it and then being intentional about what is that new thought that you want to think instead, and almost just catching it and then focusing on the new thought. Yeah, but I imagine it
Okay.
probably depends how ingrained that belief is or how long somebody has held that
Right.
belief. And then just being really like consistent and intentional and aware about really thinking about what it is that you want to be believing about yourself.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So if I'm using the affirmations of I am trying to find more joy, is that going to help rewire my brain?
That will help rewire your brain because you might also be like looking subconsciously for different things that are bringing joy in your life. And then you might notice after a
Okay.
while, you might be able to tell yourself, I am feeling joy rather than I'm trying to feel joy. And so you might notice that progression. But that definitely is a
Okay.
different thought, maybe, than nothing in life brings me joy.
Okay. Okay. And So then by rewiring your brain, does it cause you to change your actions or how you approach your life or how you deal with stress or just all kinds of things? Does that change those things?
It does change those things. And I think a lot of times how we experience things or the stories that we tell ourselves about things, when there's an emotion that's elicited, that's what we tend to focus on, right? Where it's not just a story, now it's this emotional experience. And as we're starting to then rewire our brain to something that feels better for us, you're going to notice a shift in the emotion, and that is going to create a change in your actions and the stories that you're telling yourself and how you're perceiving things. Or you might notice that you might feel more comfortable taking different risks. You might feel more confidence in different situations. You might notice yourself just feeling happier or wanting to do things as you're rebuilding that relationship with yourself. You might find yourself being more loving towards yourself and then maybe more patient and loving towards others. And so I think it does create this ripple effect shift that ends up happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So before we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to say or share with us?
No, I feel like some of the different points that I shared are things that are helpful for the listeners to your podcast. And I think these are things that I found have been really game changers for myself on my own journey and seem to really help people that I work with too, who really embrace some of these concepts. And so I hope that it does really help, even thinking if there's anything that we talked about that you might be thinking, okay, what's one thing I want to start doing today? And you can just say one thing so that it's not so overwhelming. And I guess one other piece to add to that is I always like to say it's always just about the next step. We don't have to think of getting to the end of the staircase, right? And so just thinking what's one step, one thing you might like to do, once that's feeling good, then you can add the next thing on.
Okay. Great. Well, I just loved having you on, Carolyn. I feel like I learned so much and just felt validated, and you've given me a new way to approach how I can rewire my brain in a way that feels more comfortable for me. I really appreciate that. And I thank you so much for being here and sharing this time with me.
Oh, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure and an honor to be here to be able to talk with you about some of these things too. So thank you.
You're welcome. All right. You have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me in today's episode. Be sure to check the show notes for guest links and other helpful information. I'm your host, Olivia Paige, and you can find me on all the social media platforms at Ascension Healing Sounds.